Good afternoon, everyone. We'll let everyone trickle in. Coming from our mental wellness movement break, I think we were just hosting before we get started here with the Scotiabank Climate Action Forum. As people start to trickle in, I guess we'll get started. So welcome to our first ever Scotiabank Climate Action Forum, and thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Nicole Ahmed. I'm the president of Enactus Canada. Our partnership with Scotiabank is rooted in the delivery of the Scotiabank Climate Action Challenge, which empowers Enactus teams to identify, create, and deliver projects that teach and empower others to take action to tackle climate change and its impacts. And since 2009, the impact our students have made through this challenge has truly been impressive. So let's take a look. And while we've seen great results, this year we decided to try something new to drive project ideation for the challenge and inspire teams across the country to create even more community empowerment projects focused on climate action. This year we launched the Scotiabank Climate Action Project Idea Pitch. Through this new platform, we've challenged you to develop an initiative, big or small, to reduce the carbon footprint of your campus community. And we have pulled together some incredible panelists today to help answer all your questions and inspire you as you refine your project ideas. We're going to start with a panel discussion, and then we'll give you an opportunity to ask the panelists some questions directly. So get your questions ready. We're so excited to be able to provide this platform for the student leaders in our network to connect, share, and learn from each other while hearing from some of Canada's top business leaders that are joining us today. And we are super excited to see the new project ideas that are going to come out of this forum and pitch competition. So without further ado, I'd like to thank Scotiabank for this opportunity and welcome Sandra Odendahl, Vice President, Social Impact and Sustainability at Scotiabank, to kick off today's forum. Sandra?
Thank you very much, Amy. It's so great to be here. Sorry, Nicole. We've only known each other for how long? Thanks, Nicole. It's a pleasure to be here, and I'm really delighted to and honored to be at today's forum on behalf of Scotiabank. In 2009, when Scotiabank was invited to partner with Enactus Canada to support the Climate Action Challenge, it really did seem like a natural fit. Why is that? Well, because at Scotiabank, we understand the importance of strengthening communities through environmental sustainability. And as a bank, we also understand that we can play a unique role in helping transition to a low carbon, more resilient economy, because we can help accelerate climate solutions through our core business activities. We can enable our customers and employees and communities to thrive. So your work towards building a cleaner, sustainable future is truly inspiring. As the leaders of tomorrow, you also play an important role in protecting and conserving the environment for future generations. And of course, for that, we couldn't be more proud to be supporters of this challenge. So thank you for everything that you've done to champion climate action this year. Already, you've achieved so much, and we can't wait to see what innovative solutions you create through the Scotiabank Climate Action Project Idea Pitch. But before we get to that, of course, we're going to have a really interesting forum with some great panelists. The question that we want to address in today's forum is the following. Getting to net zero. What steps can we take now to ensure that Canada achieves its commitment to be net zero by 2050? So to help us through the discussion, I am pleased to introduce the leaders on our panel. And what I would do is ask the panelists to give us all a wave as I read your names. So I'm going to start with my colleague, Brendan Seal. Brendan is the Director of Corporate Sustainability at Scotiabank. Hey, Brendan. Great color sweater, looks amazing on this Zoom video, just want to say. Joining the bank in 2019, Brendan and his team are responsible for integrating sustainability principles across the business to create value for the bank's stakeholders through improved social and environmental outcomes. And Brendan's team is also responsible for the bank's ESG related disclosures. So in fact, you'll be seeing our ESG report is coming out in the next couple of weeks. Previously, Brendan served as the head of sustainability for IKEA Canada. He was also a sustainability advisor with the Natural Step Canada, and he worked for Barrick Gold Corporation before that. Brendan holds a Master of Science in Strategic Leadership towards Sustainability and a BA in Comms. Brendan's feet like to keep company of bicycle pedals, soccer cleats, alpine ski boots, and infectious beats. Okay, infectious in the, not the literal sense, I hope. Got it. He's the father of 2 young sons. Nice. He's the father of 2 young sons who have given his work a greater depth of purpose. So welcome, Brendan. All right, our next panelist, John Coyne. So John, there you are. John is the Vice President of External Affairs and Sustainability for Unilever Canada, and he's also the Executive Chair of the Canadian Stewardship Services Alliances, Inc. John is very well known for his leadership in corporate sustainability. He's a passionate activator of the Unilever Sustainable Living Plan, and the Compass, which is Unilever's strategy to grow the business, reduce its environmental footprint, and increase its positive contribution to society. John's the executive chair of the board of Canadian Stewardship Services Alliance, Inc. and Recycle BC, and he's also a director of Evergreen. In addition, John is co-chair of the Circular Economy Leadership Coalition, which was launched in 2018 to accelerate Canada's transition to a circular economy. John also co-chairs the Partners in Project Green Steering Committee, and that's a collaborative environmental initiative of the Toronto Regional Conservation Authority. John, welcome. Our next panelist is Jessica. So Jessica Curry, who is Science, Knowledge and Innovation at WWF Canada. So Jessica supports the Science, Knowledge and Innovation team at WWF Canada by providing an evidence base for WWF Canada's conservation work, which is focused on nature-based climate solutions. Through research, analysis, and data visualization, she helps to prioritize key conservation actions and areas nationwide. Jessica has over 8 years of experience in the environmental field, and she holds an MSc in Environmental Sustainability and a BSc in Marine Biology. Jessica, nice to have you. And last but not least, we have Normand Mousseau. And Normand is Research Director of the Transition Accelerator. He is also a professor of physics at the Université de Montréal, and he's academic director of the Trache Energy Institute at Polytechnique Montréal. His research includes the study of complex materials, energy, and natural resources. He's actively involved with energy and climate policy, having co-chaired the Quebec Commission on Energy Issues in 2013, and he's actually published a number of books in this field. So welcome, Normand. And thank you to everybody for being here today. Okay, so let's get started. So I know that our audience is really keen to hear the panel's views on the topic, so I'm going to dive right in. And what I thought we would do is start with a quick fire round of insights. So what I'm going to ask is each of the panelists to take 2 minutes to share your thoughts on a very easy question. What steps can we take now to ensure that Canada achieves its commitment to be net zero by 2050? So I'm going to start with Brendan.
Great, thanks so much, Sandra, and it's a real privilege to be here with you today. Thank you all for joining us. So coming at this question from the perspective of a sustainability practitioner in the corporate space, as Sandra mentioned, my role is really to support integration with the business lines and functions across Scotiabank, and also lead on the ESG related disclosures. One of the things that really comes to mind for me as being important with this question around what we can do now to address the climate challenge over the coming decades is actually really to be scaling up existing solutions that we already know about. We often think about the deployment of attractive, sexy new technologies and so forth, and those will be, of course, part of the solution, and there's a lot of innovation and scaling required of those sorts of things. But often it's sort of upstream design or policy changes that we actually need in order to scale things that are already in play today. So, if we think about transportation as an example, it would be great if we can electrify mobility across the board, public transportation, personal vehicles, etc. But we really need to do as much as we can upfront to render unnecessary as many trips as possible to begin with, right? So just consider how we can make people make it possible and attractive for people to live, work, and play within a smaller, proximity, such that the travel is not really required as much. That is really more a question about kind of land use and planning policy than it is about the transportation mechanisms itself. So I think that kind of thinking is important, to think about these upstream solutions from a design and policy perspective that can really prevent some of the need for energy and emissions in the first place. So,
Great.
Then as we emerge from the pandemic, we can also be thinking about how we make active transportation and public transportation more attractive, for example, and functional. 50 people on bikes or in an LRT is going to be better than 50 electric cars. But if we're thinking about that technology, innovation on electric mobility from simply that perspective of getting the electric cars going, we're missing quite a lot of opportunity to begin with. So that I would encourage us to have that kind of lens on a lot of these challenges.
Okay, wonderful. So what I'm hearing is scale up existing solutions and policy shifts, not just technology shifts are needed. Excellent. John, do you want to jump in there?
Sure. Steps? Can I just say, hey, I agree with everything that Brendan just said, and then I can save a minute and a half, perhaps. Just
Perfect.
Kidding. I do agree with Brendan, and I want to thank you for talking about scaling up existing solutions, because oftentimes we get stymied by the notion that somehow we need to invent some new thing in this space, and most of what is in front of us, whether that's relating to the built environment, whether that's relating to agriculture or transportation, or almost any other aspect of our day-to-day life, a lot of technologies that we need are already in front of us. We have to pick some, we have to scale them, we have to invest in them. Thank you, Scotiabank. But we actually do have a lot of this in front of us. From Unilever's perspective, it's really important for us to make sure that we understand the relationship with our consumers. And that means that we need to look at the entire value chain of what it is that we're putting into the marketplace. Everything from what it is that we're pulling out of the ground to what it is that consumers are disposing of at the end of the life of the product that we are privileged enough to have them purchase for us. It's that full range of the value chain that we need to make sure that people are investing in, from a design point of view, from a production point of view, and from a use point of view. Because much of what happens from a climate point of view, from our perspective, isn't within our control. It is within our consumers' control. The trick is to find out how we can exercise our responsibility in that area to help consumers make the transition to a low carbon economy. So it's the full value chain for us, and there is a multitude of activities that we can engage in, and a lot of work and a lot of very interesting activities that we can all contribute to moving into the near future, because this is genuinely urgent.
Thank you very much. That's great. So what I'm hearing is, yes, scale up existing solutions, but it's also look at the entire value chain, enable your customers to lower their carbon footprint when they use your products and services.
Yes.
Amazing. Jessica, what do you think, or what are a couple of steps that we can take to ensure Canada achieves its net zero commitment?
So net zero really means we need to be taking as many emissions out of the atmosphere as we're putting into it. So to begin, we obviously need to significantly reduce our greenhouse gas emissions, and that includes in every sector. So implementing some sort of carbon budget. But then once we kind of have those approaches in play, we can turn to things that actively draw or actively take carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere. So that includes things like nature-based climate solutions, where we can sequester and store carbon in our lands and seas. And I'm assuming you've probably heard of nature-based climate solutions because they've been all the talk recently. They've been in the headlines. They've kind of been this international focus for the last couple of years. But just to summarize, they include actions to protect, sustainably manage, and restore our ecosystems. So that could be something like planting a tree, which helps to kind of take in carbon dioxide. But then it can also be something like no-till farming practices, where we're ensuring that the carbon that's already stored in the ecosystem essentially stays there. We're not disrupting it and releasing it back out into the atmosphere. So really it's decarbonize the economy. We need to protect our natural carbon stores and then enhance those carbon sinks so we're taking as many emissions out of the atmosphere as possible.
Okay, so basically you're saying is do the math, everybody. less on the plus, more on the minus, and a bigger storage in the middle. Excellent. Normand, over to you.
Yes, I agree with what's been said. I think we have to realize that getting to net zero by 2050 is a huge challenge. And we have to move and start now. I totally agree. We have to start with the easiest fruits also. For example, decarbonizing space heating. So the house, getting rid of the natural gas in houses, getting rid of oil. Those are easy ones. We have the technology, it's accessible in cost and all this. So this is the type of things we need to do. Transportation is also a big issue, and transportation, how we move, but also how we get stuff moved to our place. We don't have individually so much control on everything around this, except where we live and where we work. So those are places where we have some control, what type of vehicle we buy, but otherwise the control is a bit limited. So we also need to act on on people we elect, on people around us to make decisions, to make sure that they move. Because if you look in Canada, more than half the emissions are not directly attributable to people. It's really industrial emissions. So we need to push on those too. And this has to be done rapidly. And the decisions we make today, it's so short, 30 years, that we cannot do half-baked decisions. We cannot say, well, let's get rid of oil and put natural gas, because this is not compatible with getting net zero in 2050. Everything we do today, all the investments we do today, have to be compatible with the objective, which is almost tomorrow. Okay, I'll be dead, but for most of you, you'll be there, So it's important that you act in this spirit. We have to get all the actions we make have to be compatible with this.
Okay, so thank you very much, Normand. So I think you're, in summary, the big thing is do it now, no half-baked attempts, because it's so urgent that we decarbonize. And also don't forget to start with easy stuff, which I think is a theme I heard through everyone's comments. Anyone who's never read one of my favorite papers on climate change is the work by Pakala, the Wedges Project, from it was from 2007, 2006, I don't know. But if you ever want to read a really good paper that's quite old now, but really frames this idea of massive deployment of things that are not that sexy, and how we could actually get, we could wrestle climate change to the ground with I think they came up with 7 interventions, but at a scale which is actually hard to imagine how you would do it. But it was to illustrate that we don't need to wait for a magic solution, that it's the desire, the ability, all sorts of things have to line up, but we can go hard on things we already know work. So thank you for that. And if for anyone who's listening who's never read that piece of work, they read at Princeton, and it's amazing. Okay, I want to move on to some more targeted questions that would actually really help the students probably refine their project ideas. So I'm going to start the first question. Actually, I'm going to ask Brendan and Normand to weigh in on this one. Maybe I'll start with Normand. I guess, Normand, I want to know what your thoughts are on What is the most surprising source of GHGs that you think a lot of people are not aware of?
Let me start by a number, 78. 78% of the emissions in Canada are not caused by the oil and gas industry, okay? Which means that we don't have to worry about what happens in Alberta to start moving. And I would say too much of the emphasis in Canada is about oil and gas in Alberta, and that's an easy way for not moving the rest of the country. So remember this. More than 3/4 of the emissions are not caused by the oil and gas industry. So we have a big leverage to move and to act on transportation, on public space heating, on the industrial, agriculture, waste, all these sectors where we can start moving irrespective of what's happening in Alberta. And that's really important because by pointing fingers, it's been an easy way for so many other people who pollute to get rid, to hide in the corner and not take the responsibility. And we have to break this in Canada, I think.
Yeah, that's a really great point to make. Very important is look at the data and in terms of deciding where to push levers, what levers are the good ones to push. Brendan, you've had a lot of different roles and in a few different sectors now. So I'd be really interested in your view on what you think the most surprising source of GHGs that people may not think about.
Yeah, firstly, I think it's important to pick up on a couple of things that Normand said. The Canada's GHG emissions inventory is publicly available. It's you can go and see it on the federal government's website. It's broken down by region. It's broken down by industry sector, and so that is a really good way to just understand where the emissions are coming from across this country. And to Normand's point, as oil and gas is a significant portion, but there's a whole bunch of other stuff that is even more significant. I think within the context of fossil fuels, I would suggest that there's probably less of an understanding than we need about how much of that is made up by natural gas. And I wanted to key in also on this point about space heating into building stock. In the roles that I've had previously in the retail sector and even in this one, I think we spend a lot of time thinking about the sources of electricity in particular. And that is important. It's crucial that we pivot to more green sources of electricity, and corporations can do that too, more renewable energy procurement. There isn't enough energy, pardon the pun, there isn't enough focus today on how we are heating our spaces. And in Europe, for example, there's much more rapid adoption of ground source and air source heat pumps, which when powered by renewable energy can have a big impact on emissions. And so I think that's one where I would say there's, it shouldn't really be a surprise, but I don't think there's enough focus on it.
Hey, thank you. That's a really important point. Before moving on to the next question, John or Jessica, did you want to add anything, or did you want to weigh in on that? Surprising, sources of GHGs or GHG issues people don't often think about.
Sure. Jessica, you want to go first? And then I do have some minutes.
Sure. So I guess I would say in 2018, I think it was 2018, I'm going to have to go back and check that now that I'm saying it out loud. But Canada's lands emitted roughly 240 megatons of carbon dioxide. And that was largely due to some natural disturbances like forest fires and pest outbreaks. So I'm not saying they were all human caused, but to put that into context, that's roughly equal to our emissions from, I think it's oil, gas, and electricity combined. So my point here is just that we need to make sure that we're protecting nature so that nature itself can play a pivotal role in addressing climate change rather than kind of contributing to the crisis itself.
That's a shocking number. Like that is a
great.
lot. That's like a third of our emissions or something, right?
So it's not necessarily counted within our usual breakdown because they're also natural disturbances. So, I mean, you can say forest fires are increasing because of climate change, but we don't necessarily quantify that in our reporting to the UNFCCC.
Wow. Okay. Yeah, John.
I think I'll say something a little different because I agree with what I've heard from the other panelists, but perhaps, and I know this sounds sarcastic, but the most surprising source of GHGs is really the hot air of all of the people who talk about the fact that we have high GHGs and we've got a problem with climate change. And they spend all of their time admiring this dreadful problem, which is upon our doorstep. And then they retreat back into the frameworks that they are comfortable with, whether those are governmental frameworks or corporate frameworks or academic frameworks, and we do not get the job done. And this notion that somehow we're going to fix this problem with a belief set that is an inherited belief set of how the world has been up to this point is just wrong. The era of unlimited consumption must come to an end. And I believe a lot of people are beginning to understand that, particularly given population growth and the reach of how it is that we think about matters of prosperity and consumption and so on around the globe. But we need to lean into a very different belief structure. And for the purposes of those who are here on this call, not my fellow panelists who are all experts in this area, but for those of you who are coming in a generation that is going to inherit all of these problems, that belief set is going to be absolutely critical to challenge and to make progress against if we are going to succeed. Because it's not just net zero by 2050. We need to effectively go negative before 2050 in order to arrest the very serious challenges that climate change is going to visit upon the entire planet. And we're not going to escape any of those things. So for me, the most surprising source of GHGs actually stems from a belief problem. And I think we all have a role to address that, and we can all make a very positive contribution to changing all of those models that are in front of us and to challenging all of those models, because the time is now to do it. In fact, time's past for doing it, but we have to do it now.
Well, thanks, John. And actually that leads to the question that I was going to pose next. And maybe, John, I think I'll let you build on what you just said if you'd like to, but the next question I wanted to bring forward to the panel was, what do you think is the biggest GHG issue in Canada specifically? So I think, John, you've touched on it a little bit just a second ago, but do you want to dig into that, the biggest issue for Canada?
Well, part of that is lack of knowledge and to some degree, Sandra, complacency. But there is also real fear out there. And I don't want to underestimate the fact that there are a lot of people who would love to act in this space, but they are dreadfully afraid of the implications of that. You're an oil and gas worker in the province of Alberta. You probably know that climate change is a real problem that you need to deal with, but oh my God, your community relies on your job and your company's payroll in order to sustain your community. If you were a car manufacturer and you're looking at the investments that you need to make in order to electrify the car fleets that you want to put out into the marketplace, you are dreadfully afraid of your ability to properly manage those kinds of investments, having discussions with financial institutions like yours. And our relationship with governments is broken completely. We have inherited an 1867 constitutional framework that is not suitable to the 21st century. And we need to tell people that. And we need to get the bureaucracy and the political class to understand that we need to smooth out all of these jurisdictional differences that we love to talk about in this country and move to a much more, as Brendan pointed out, scale-based understanding of what the country needs, top to bottom, side to side. Because if we're sitting here in Toronto or we're in Montreal or Vancouver and Calgary, and we're not talking about the permafrost up in the territories, then we're missing something. And if we're not talking about the oil and gas worker in Alberta or the coal worker in Nova Scotia or the auto worker in Oakville, we're really missing something. And if we ignore the agricultural community, which is going to play an absolutely pivotal role in how it is that we develop the solutions in this space, which has dreadful implications for the cost of what it is that we buy at the grocery store, and we're missing something. So this is complex, but it requires each of us to thoroughly engage in a way that we have not engaged up to this point, plan, act, and be held accountable. And if we can get ourselves into that way of thinking about these issues, it's going to be easier for banks, easier for professors, easier for those of us in the NGO and the CPG communities to actually make progress. But we have to start with that challenge in front of us.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry for the long speech.
No, that was great. It was very comprehensive, but I think it was really important. I think fear, complacency, and all the things that need to change and all of the sectors that are going to be affected, it causes people to, you know, sort of hesitate, I think, unfortunately. Jessica, what about you? Do you want to talk a bit more about what you think the biggest GHG issue is for Canada?
Sure. So I was going to say something different, but now that I'm thinking about it here, I want to say perhaps we should stop kind of clinging on to these fads. I feel like right now, like nature-based solution is really, it's a fad. Everyone loves it. Everyone's talking about it. And that's literally my job. So maybe I shouldn't be saying this, but, but I just wanted to provide some words of caution too. I don't think we should be necessarily following along these lines if it means that it's at the expense of all the other things we need to do to decarbonize the economy. Because climate change can actually affect the carbon balance of our ecosystems. So something that was once a net sink of emissions can become a net source of emissions once we reach those like temperature thresholds or environmental thresholds. So we don't want that to happen. And in order for nature-based solutions to actually be effective, we need to first reduce our emissions overall. We can't be using nature as the excuse to kind of continue on as business as usual.
Okay, so you think that could be an issue for Canada potentially if we start to think that if we just plant a bunch of trees, we're good. We don't have to do anything else. Yay. Yeah, I could see that being a problem. All right, thank you very much. Actually, Brendan and Armand, did you want to? We have enough time if you'd like to weigh in.
If I may.
Yeah.
I would pile up on what John was saying, and I would say it's the inability of Canada to act. And Canada has a lot of difficulty getting into action its words or its plan. If you look in the US will move once it decides to move at a much quicker pace than Canada. We've seen it for the pandemic, for example. The US decided we're moving on the vaccines and just put the money in and just put the decision, lifted the hurdles and said, we're moving there, okay? In Canada, we are unable to remove hurdles. So we sit in committees, we discuss, we consult, and at the end, we get nothing. If you look at the Clean Fuel Act, for example, it's been in discussion for years, and every time it comes back, it's diluted. And by the time it will be on the table, it will be useless because we're moving to electric cars anyway. So this is, I would say, the big problem in Canada. And I'm not sure it's a question of constitution. If you look in the UK, which has the same parliamentary system, the country has a capacity to act and to decide and take risks, which is much greater than Canada. We are so afraid of making mistakes that we are not moving on anything. And this is, to me, a dramatic situation. And that's why we've been talking and more or less together with this idea of moving for much longer than the US that keeps coming back and forth, but we have not accomplished anything. The US has decreased its emission more than Canada in percentage over the last 10 years, okay? So yeah, we can say Trump is horrible and we have here Trudeau, but look at the numbers. We're not moving because we are unable to take risk and act.
So just to unpack that a tiny bit more before I turn it over to Brendan, the first thing my mind went to was, is it because of the way our constitution is designed and the provinces have authority for a lot of environmental issues, et cetera, but you're suggesting that it's not necessarily the case because there are examples where they still manage to overcome that.
Yeah, so and you can look at provinces and provinces on their own where they can act have not been much more successful. In Quebec, we have spent billions of dollars without any success. So it's not, there's no efforts. In Ontario, there's been a lot of money spent, little success. We closed a few coal plants, so that's a good thing. But besides that, not much has happened. So it's not a question of money. It's not a question of, calling it. It's a question of delivering.
And is that just cultural? Like, is that just Canadians tend to be more like?
I think we don't act as a country. We're still a colony. So we moved from British colony to US colony. And we have not realized that we have to take our own responsibility and act upon them. So I'm not sure if it's too political, but
I think it's great. You were asked the question and you answered it, and I think it's a really important food for thought. Brendan, do you want to? Would you like to talk
Sure.
a little bit about the biggest GHG issues we're facing? Normand, it feels like we're our own worst enemy, basically.
Yeah. Well, and you can look at this question from the perspective of these big sort of systemic challenges, and then it's kind of in really simple terms. I'll just make 3 quick points. One is, if we just look at the data since 1990, the 2 rises in GHG emissions are in fact oil and gas and in transportation. The inventory shows that we're actually seeing a flattening or a decline in other sectors due to efficiencies and improvements over time. So that's encouraging, but those 2 areas are still growing, the transportation and oil and gas. For me, a big concern, something that keeps me up at night, and Jessica touched on it, is this idea that feedback loops could actually reinforce warming if we reach certain tipping points. And that one for me, that raises serious concerns. John mentioned permafrost in the north, and if we reach a certain point of warming, then we just get large masses of methane released into the atmosphere, which could accelerate warming. So we might actually have to do more to achieve net zero than we think if we cross some of these thresholds. And that just causes us to think, okay, we need to move even more at scale than we think we do. We need to double down on stuff that's going to take carbon out of the atmosphere, and we need to scale up the emissions reductions like crazy. So the final point that I'll just make on this point is picking up on a point that Normand made off the top, which is I think we also need to be very cautious about the investments that we're making, that they are in fact consistent with this net zero trajectory, and they don't lock in future emissions. Sometimes we feel good about ourselves if we do something that is going to reduce emissions, but if it's an investment with a longer term horizon that actually secures the fact that we will have emissions in the future, that could be problematic for us, and it's not going to enable us to move as quickly as we need to in the shorter term. So I think we need to really take a longer term view of investments, and with this kind of sense of what could become a stranded asset, or what could lock us into emissions that will become very problematic in the future, and avoid those sorts of investments if we can.
Mm-hmm. So I think that I'm gonna actually, you can leave your mic on, Brendan, because you started talking about some of the solutions, and my next question is around that. Oh, and actually, by the way, for anyone who's wondering, John Coyne has had a hard stop at 3:30, so he thanks everybody for listening, and he was happy that he was able to participate for the first half of the panel. But yeah, we didn't kick him off the island or anything. He was scheduled to have another obligation at 3:30. So Brendan, the question for you is thinking about some of the innovative solutions, and we've talked about how the fact that we can't just sit around waiting for some innovative gizmo to save us from ourselves. However, there's no question that innovation does play a strong role it's a piece of the puzzle in terms of all the things we're going to need to do. So what are some of the ones that you would consider your favorites, or ones that we should be keeping an eye on to reduce carbon footprint?
Sure. So I'll give a couple of examples. Starting in our sector, Sandra, the financial sector, I think I'm really encouraged by the emergence of developments in the sustainable finance field. These things include things like green bonds that specifically raise money for very specific purposes to drive emissions reductions. But we're also seeing the emergence of things like sustainability linked financing, where the interest rate of a loan provided to a client is actually tied to certain outcomes, and often we're seeing it tied to greenhouse gas emissions reductions. Now, where we can see ambitious levels of reduction that then enable the client to secure a slightly lower rate on a loan, I think that's exceptional. And if we can, as a financial sector, do more of that to enable not just large corporates and commercial clients, but potentially in the future even retail clients to do that, I think that's going to be very, very helpful. Based on my experience in the retail sector and sort of in the manufacturing side of things, I'm really encouraged, as John would know, but just having left the conversation, that I'm very intrigued and interested and energized by the development of the more circular economy sort of model. And so when you think about things like tool libraries or shared use models rather than ownership models, I think this is exciting. Car sharing programs are another good example of this, where we can take material and have it be used, at a much higher rate of utility within society. That actually then reduces the need for consumption overall and has a huge impact on emissions as well. So repair, refurbishment, secondhand markets, all these things are really positive from an emissions perspective as well. And then I would say I'm really inspired by the work that WWF and Jessica and others are doing in the nature-based solutions space. I mean, it's not going to be the only thing that we need, but I think, from the standpoint of your campuses, rehabilitation of and rewilding of natural areas that serve, that could serve as carbon sinks and provide a multitude of other benefits as well, in addition to carbon sequestration, is a really attractive possibility depending on the campus that you're on.
Brendan, you should work for us. That was a good pitch.
Actually, Jessica and Norma, maybe Jessica first, do you have any interesting, innovative solutions that you'd want to share or flag to the group?
Yeah, just that last point that Brendan made, I think is really great, especially in the context of this challenge and for your campuses. I actually started some seedlings indoors last week. I'm going to plant some flowers and trees around my property this summer. I have a vegetable garden going. You can kind of like kill two birds with one stone. I don't think I'm supposed to say that at the wildlife organization, but you can have some food going towards some campus programs, as well as trying to kind of get that carbon in the ground as well. So those are the kind of things I like to do, just because, I don't know, sometimes I feel a little bit disconnected from the climate crisis. So it's nice to be able to do something just in your own backyard or on your campus that can really contribute as well.
Great. Norma, what about you? Oh, mute. Audio.
The pathway approaches that now we're using at the Transition Accelerator, for example, which is an approach that is really strategic. And that comes back to what Brendan was saying. No, we have to, it's not only technology, it's the way to do this. And the strategic approach of making sure that the way to decarbonize includes all the aspects. So we have to think about financing, we have to think about technology, but also training. The people will need to be doing something, the market creation. It's nice to develop an idea, but if there's nobody to buy the first one, there's no second one. So it's often where we fail in Canada at that level. The goal orientation, we need to know where we want to go and measure with respect to this. So this kind of approach, which is often not what programs are. If you look at governmental program, it's not as much the goal of, do I distribute that much money this year? Not is the money delivering on what I'm supposed to do. So all these strategic approaches are crucial to get there. And Brendan and Jessica mentioned it before, but climate reduction is not, or climate warming is not the only problem we're facing. So in this strategic approach, you have to link the reduction in greenhouse gas emissions to the other environmental issues we're facing at. If we just neglect that, well, we'll have low emissions, but destroyed environment. So in the end, we're not that much of a winning in the situation this way. And so the approach, I think, is the way, and you need to do it much more. And in Canada, again, we don't have this tradition of approaching things in a strategic way.
Okay, thanks for that. So I'm going to turn to the last question before we turn it over to some audience questions, which I've seen a few are coming in. So I'm going to ask each of you to chime in on a measurement question. So I guess the important thing here is, we need to know how we're doing. We need to know essentially, how do you measure GHG emissions? So what are some of your suggestions for measuring emissions? Are there tools that you would recommend? Yeah, Brendan, do you want to start?
Sure. I think we're fortunate in the time that we're living in. There's obviously a few great kind of online calculators that you can use. I think depending on the application, even just carbonfootprint.com has some good open source calculators that you can use depending on what the needs are. Just another thing that I would point out that is important is emission factors. So depending on where you are in the country, the emissions intensity of the energy that you consume will be different. And so that's just another important thing to refer to when you're trying to calculate how much your emissions you your baseline that you're starting with, and then also what the emissions might be resulting from your projects. And so again, the government of Canada has these all listed online. You could, if you search for that, Canada's emissions factors, you can find those. And then I think we also, short of actually taking direct measurement of emissions in the atmosphere, which it is very difficult to do and is not done widely, there is some like sort of proxy data and estimation that's involved in this, I think, just by nature. But I'd welcome my peers to chime in on this one as well, as they may have quite something to add here.
Yeah, okay, thanks very much, Brendan. Norma, anything, do you have some favorite tools and methods for measuring emissions you would suggest?
I mean, yeah, there's a lot of tools if you want to measure specific emission. If you take a trip or things like this, how your emissions. So those are, so individual ones. For food, is very difficult to get something which is accurate. I agree. For electricity, you have to be careful because you have to tie where you are in the country. It's wide. More at the national level, the problem is not so much measuring, but getting the data in a timely fashion to know whether we're moving. And in Quebec, there's a project called the Boussole Climatique, where they're developing an app to be able to follow also how your emission, as you make changes in your life, how your emissions are varying. Because the problem of snapshot is that it's difficult to know what that means. So you have to kind of measure against yourself and see how things are moving. This is much more significant, I would say, because the numbers are not so precise, but the kind of evolution is important. And at the national level, we have data that is 2 or 3 years old, which is not appropriate. Now, we know unemployment of last month. We should know what's the GHG emissions of the country after a month or 2 months later. So then we know when we make global changes, whether it has an impact or not. And measurements, I think it's a great question, because if you don't measure, there's no way. And if you don't measure in a timely fashion, there's no way you can make progress.
Thank you. Yeah, Jessica, did you want to add anything?
Sure. So I believe everyone here is in college or university. You're all students on a campus somewhere. So, I mean, you could also head over to your science department and in terms of your projects, see if they have the skills or tools to help you measure carbon from maybe planting some trees or implementing a garden somewhere. And if that's not an option, as Brendan said, there are some kind of like online generic calculators. I know there's one that has like every tree species for every province, and you can kind of get some sort of estimate. And then kind of on the flip side of that, WWF Canada is also working on actively trying to identify these emerging carbon monitoring technologies for nature. So if you have a really cool idea and you want to pitch it to me, I'm all ears as well. So you can keep your eyes open for some opportunities related to that.
Great, thank you. All right, so great answers. Thank you very much. Thank you for sharing those thoughts with us. And I'm sure our audience is eager to ask some questions. And in fact, I see some in the chat already. So I'm just going to suggest to the audience, if you have a question for the panel, send it through the chat. And I'll do my best to get through as many as we can in the next 11 minutes or so. So I'm going to go to one of the first ones that was posted here. Actually, this one ties into the discussion of measurement tools. Someone had asked that question, but was also wondering if there are any tools that also convert emissions as well as dollars saved, so money saved by different interventions and not just the CO2 emissions. Does this ring a bell for any of you? Does anybody know of any tools that could help someone calculate whether their initiative is both saving money and reducing GHGs?
I can sort of just chime in on this one. I think, again, you've got to look at the electricity costs. If it's, for example, if it's an electricity or energy saving solution, you've got to look at it on a jurisdictional basis in this country, as the energy pricing and so forth is quite different across the country. So just as an example, when I was with IKEA, we used to try to make claims about, if you switch this light bulb to this light bulb, you could save this many dollars, but you've got to be really clear about what your assumptions are, right? Like, okay, if the light bulb's on for 3 hours a day, the old one was this many watts, the new one is this many watts, and you live in a place where the average cost of electricity is this many cents per kilowatt hour, then that's how we get this calculation. But there's so many variables in that you can't be precise. And I think you just need to bear that in mind when you're trying to calculate savings as well. And then it gets even trickier with like time of use billing as well. Like what time of day do you turn on the light bulb? So it's hard, but I think, bear that in mind, that the location where you are will influence this significantly.
I remember doing a project with some engineering students a few years ago where we looked at incandescent versus LED bulbs. And unsurprisingly, if you live somewhere that's really cold, actually incandescent bulbs, which throw off some heat, they're wasteful in terms of throwing off heat. But if you're heating with like an oil furnace or something, it may be better to have an incandescent bulb running on green electricity, which will help warm a room a bit so your furnace doesn't have to come on quite as much. And they were doing it was really super, I mean, it falls apart in the winter because then you have to also cool more if you're using incandescent bulbs because they throw off heat. But in the winter, they actually help reduce the amount of heat you need from other sources. And that's when you start to realize how complicated it is, because then you look at how cold is each postal code, and it was a massive, horrific undertaking.
So in short, if you can come up with a great way to measure GHG as part of your project, you win.
Yay! People would be willing to pay for it, I'm sure. Any other comments on that one?
I just wanted to chime in and say that obviously it's nice to have some cost savings, but in terms of your projects, you could also pitch some other co-benefits of your project. So maybe you're reducing air pollution, or maybe you're helping wildlife. I'm sure there's a long list you can come up with. So just some other factors that you could consider.
Yeah. One of the questions that came in too is, common misconceptions that people have about climate change, and how do we combat these? And you touched on a few. I mean, I think we touched on a few. I think one theme was a misconception that it's going to be all about fancy new technology, which isn't true. But are there other misconceptions people have about climate change, and how do we break those down? Anyone want to?
I would say one of the misconceptions is that there's still debate to be had there. I mean, the world is moving, okay? China has embarked, Europe has embarked, the US are moving. So it's no longer even a question, is it relevant whether I believe in it or not, okay? It's a question, the rest of the world is moving. If I'm not moving, I'll be left back at the back. Nobody will want to buy what I'm making. No, and I will be sitting alone. So in some way, the debate has so much shifted that now it's, how do we get it done better and faster? That's really where we should be. And it's over in some way. I mean, the debate of should we act or not is not there anymore. It's a wrong debate. It's on the wrong planet. And I think that's really where we are today.
Yeah, go ahead.
Maybe, with this gathering of folks, you individually hopefully don't fall into this category, but I think there's a lot of paralysis because people feel that their actions can't really make a difference in the big picture. But it's one of these things where when we add it all up, it does have an impact. And so if it's something like, shifting your investments to, something greener, or eating less meat and changing your diet and reducing your emissions that way, I mean, I would encourage you to think about the impact potentially that you have with your own individual behaviors, but also then this co-benefit idea is really important in those contexts as well, right? It could be health benefits, you might get better returns on your investments. There's all kinds of things that we need to think about with these sorts of things. And so the choices that you individually do make and the influence you can have on people around you matters. And I think one misconception is that may not be the case.
Yeah, and by just talking about meat, I mean, the consumption, what we buy matters. It's not only the energy we burn directly. So we don't have that much information on the carbon footprints of what we buy, but we have to be aware of this. And when we make choices, we have to think about this in order to push in the right direction also.
One of my friends in a former job, she who was the environmental manager for one of the other banks, she said to me, she taught her nephews, she brought them to the mall at Christmas, and they were, we want to go in this store, we want to go in this store. And she said, she made them stop and look around and said, look around you. Everything you see is going to be in a landfill someday. almost everything you see is going to be in a landfill someday. So think about that. Do we really need to bring that home? I'm like, I'm going to use that on my kids. It didn't work, but but it's true. It's very sobering. Consumption choices, massive impact.
Well, I think maybe what you were getting at, Normal, and maybe if I could just crystallize this a little bit, is, you know, it's not just the impact of that individual purchase, right? But when you invest your money this way, or you buy this, you're actually casting a vote in favor of the entire
supply chain
brought you that product, right? You're voting for that supply chain. You're voting for the material choices. You're voting for all of those things that all have an impact. And so if you can shift that a little bit, that can have, you know, money matters, right? Where the capital flows, Sandra and I understand this really well. Where the capital flows is really powerful. It's really important. And so you
That's much clearer. Thanks.
Yeah. Absolutely. People, like, you have to vote with your wallet to the extent that you can. And the most environmentally friendly purchase is the one you don't make. There's just no question about it. That goes back to circular economy, which of course John was talking about. Okay, really another question here. One of the students was asking, are there any training courses or certifications that you would recommend that project members might want to look into to become more credible? Does anybody, Jessica, I'm going to start with you. Does anything come to mind? Sorry, I don't want to put you on the spot.
I'm currently taking a course at U of T right now, and it's in greenhouse gas accounting.
There you go.
So if that's of interest to you, you can basically do the greenhouse accounting of your campus. So those sorts of courses are, I think, at many different colleges and universities. So if it interests you, feel free.
Yeah, thank you. Normand, did you have a?
Yeah, I mean, there are many courses in sustainable development on energy sector. So depending on the university, the name is a bit different. So I think there's in many places, these courses are available for all students. So and then you have certificates, but again, if you want, those are also dependent on the institution basis.
Mm-hmm. Brendan, did you want to add anything?
No, well, I guess just that, you know, for specific industry sectors too, like there are also professional certifications that could be relevant. So if, for example, you're interested in the built environment, or you're an engineer, you know, something like a LEED certification could help. It's quite, you know, quite related to climate, but it looks at other aspects of sustainable development as well. So I think it's a bit dependent on whether you're, you know, very specifically focused on GHG accounting, like what Jessica's describing, or if it's something that's more industry focused, or an area that, you know, a sector perhaps that you plan on influencing.
Okay, I'm going to call this one the last question. And this question is, so we talked about innovation, we talked about scaling things that are already existing. And this person was asking, what existing solutions in your views and in your experience do you think that the students and other organizations could focus on scaling? Like, what needs TLC for scaling? I'm just paraphrasing there. What existing solutions in your views could focus on scaling?
I mean, a lot of the transformation can be scaled up. You're talking about sharing projects, you're talking about isolation, so buildings, transportation, so many, but you have to think of scaling up from the beginning, okay? Suppose you develop a project where a community project where people have to spend 6, 7, 8 hours a week to do this. For example, you want to share a car, but you have to manage this and that and that. It's not scalable project because the only people very dedicated to the problem will embark on this. So it's nice, it will have an impact, but it's not something that can be scaled up. So from the start, when you think about how you construct the project, so it's not as much the topic, but how you think of it, that will depend whether it can be scaled up or not. And that's and this is not something you think after the fact. It has to be from the onset. Is it the right solution? Because it will orient the way you build a solution.
So is it scalable right at the start is the question you should be answering.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to have to wrap it up there. Thank you very much, Normand. So thank you, everyone. That was so inspiring. And so as I said at the beginning of the forum, climate action and education is really important to Scotiabank. So we're as excited about this opportunity for you to develop some innovative solutions as Canada strives to become net zero by 2050. So we're as excited as you are. And we're also really grateful to Enactus Canada for convening this forum and to all the panelists who joined us today for sharing their wisdom and insights on this important topic. And of course, for all the students who participated, I want to say thank you for your great questions. Thank you for the work that you do in your communities to improve your communities through climate action. And good luck with your project pitches. And with that, we're going to end the forum, and I'll say have a great afternoon. Thank you very much.
Bye and good luck to all. Thanks.